You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cricket Podcast, where we're going to be talking about two things today. It's T20 craziness. Well, it's kind of T20 craziness. We've got the 100, we've got the Asia Cup, and we've got a bunch of questions from Twitter. I'm Jack Hope, and to talk about those things, I'm joined by Max Rowe Brown. How you doing, Max? You're looking Vladimir Zelensky-like this evening in your green T-shirt.
Yeah, no, I'm equally, equally proud of my country and full of leadership material.
Okay, very good. And Ed Ferrer from the 100 podcast. How are you doing, Ed? Have you enjoyed the group stage of the tournament?
It's been good. I think there were some issues like not enough close finishes so far in this tournament. But tonight, with Paul Walter coming up clutch, I mean, frankly, I had everything a T20/100 cricket match should ever want. So, no, it's been good fun. I'm enjoying it. I think this weekend's going to be good.
Great, yeah. So as I said, we'll talk about the 100. I think we'll wrap up the group stage, talk about the knockout fixtures coming up on Friday and then the final Saturday. And then in the second portion of the show, Max and I will talk about India v Hong Kong and get you up to speed on the Asia Cup action so far. Max, before we get into that, what messages do you want to pass on to people at home?
As always, please do like and subscribe to this on YouTube if you are watching on YouTube, or if not, if you're on Spotify, leave us a review. We haven't asked that for a while, have we? Leave a review on Spotify.
No.
Preferably 5 stars. 4 would be acceptable. Any below that would be disappointing. So please don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah. Just don't bother in that case. Head over to Twitter, Instagram, and now TikTok at the Cricket Pod over there. And if you want to support us directly, then patreon.com/the Cricket Pod is the best way to do that.
That's all good. And who is the show presented by?
The show is presented by, as you said, everyone's favorite sports podcast sponsor, Manscaped, who are offering you 20% off plus free worldwide shipping if you use the code CricketPod on their website, on any of their wonderful goodies, ranging from ball trimmers to deodorant to underwear and beyond. So Cricket Pod, manscaped.com. It's in the show notes. It's on the big blue thing that surrounds us. Head over there.
Great. Let's talk about the 100 then. So we now know the teams who are qualifying from both sides of the table. I'll quickly summarise that. In the women's half of the tournament, Oval Invincibles won the group, so we'll head straight through to Saturday's final. Southern Brave and Trent Rockets finished second and third, respectively. Trent Rockets winning the mother of all bun fights to get that third spot with 2 other teams equal on points. They will play on Friday night, Southern Brave v Trent Rockets. In the men's tournament, Trent Rockets men's team won outright, 6 wins and 2 defeats from their 8 matches. Then there was a similar-ish situation as on the women's side, with 3 teams finishing on 5 points. The 2 that go through are Manchester Originals and London Spirit, with Birmingham Phoenix missing out on everyone's favourite tiebreaker, net run rate. The match, and I think that we should probably start with the match we just saw. It was a really good cricket match. The match that sort of finally ended things from the men's perspective has just wrapped up. It was Manchester Originals v Oval Invincibles. It went down to the final sort of 4 balls, with it still quite competitive before Will Jacks threw one in the crowd. And Oval came up a little short. Ed, you said we've been crying out for a close finish here or there in the tournament. It did deliver tonight, didn't it? I don't know if you want to talk about that and any of the permutations and so on that I may have skipped over in my little summary there.
Well, I thought it was a great match. I think the Manchester Originals are a really interesting story here because, frankly, me and Charlie, who run the 100 podcast, thought the team was terrible coming into this tournament. And we thought we were proven right after 3 games where they lost 3 and they looked like I had no idea what they were doing. But they've got an absolute heater. I mean, everything's gone their way this tournament since those first 3 games. Josh Little has turned up and been really, really fantastic for them. Paul Walter, a man who bowled 1 over for the Blast for Essex this year, and has never really been a good bowler, let alone an average bowler. His career is suddenly bowling like peak Mohammed Irfan, frankly. Everything is going their way, and it's weird, isn't it, that you lose Hasaranga before the tournament, you lose Josh Butler halfway through the tournament, you lose Andre Russell halfway through the tournament, and somehow they're significantly better than when they started. It's a very interesting team dynamic. I think ultimately this was kind of what the originals were supposed to be, though. Wayne Madsen, we talked about for years now, is supposed to be an Old Trafford cricketer. Great sweeper, great player of spin, hits the gaps hard, has lots of different scoring options. Tonight you saw why they brought him into the side, why he fits them so nicely. It's a shame he doesn't really bowl anymore as well, though they've got a multitude of part-time off spinners if they really want it. But I thought he was excellent. I just think Oval Invincibles didn't really have enough bite, frankly, with the ball. I mean, it's tough when you lose Reece Topley, a player like him. When you lose a gun bowler like that in this tournament, it's very difficult. And then when you replace Son on the Rhine with Peter Hatsoglu, tonight could have been really, really different. And I think that's ultimately the difference as all of these overseas players leave. Which teams ascend and which teams get through without their best players, and which players struggle. And I just don't think Oval ever really had the horses to take enough wickets tonight to really break through a team. So they don't really have that without Topley and Narine, and then just didn't really have enough with the bat either, unfortunately. Obviously, Jason Roy's been horrendously out of form as well. So that's been a hit for them. But yeah, impressed with the originals overall. And the fact that last year they only played, I think, 2 games at Old Trafford, and now tonight you see what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to play on those side of tracks. They're supposed to work that kind of cricket, and they were really excellent.
Max, their win comes to the expense. We'll talk about the other team that got knocked out, and then we'll talk about the 2 that go through and so on. Their win tonight came at the expense of Oval. Oval to me are the team that are kind of the almost team of this tournament. They did so much right and almost were an excellent cricket team, but in a few of the matches made some sort of perplexing strategic decisions. Made some bad calls on matchup fronts, I think, a few times, and on one notable occasion, basically failed to chase a score. Failed to attempt to chase a score. It's fine to fail to chase, but fail to attempt is completely different. Strange.
Yeah.
They'll be quite sad, won't they, that they're not going through?
Yes, you'd expect so. You wouldn't want them to think they'd be happy to have not made it to the final stage of the competition. But I mean, that's sort of where we penned them before the tournament, wasn't it? The sort of that they would be close, but possibly just about miss out. And that's, as you say, been the sort of the story of their tournament so far. As you said, Ed, losing Narine is a pretty big blow, bearing in mind no one is able to hit Sunil Narine anywhere. He's, I think, probably the best economy of anyone in the 100. Certainly looks that way from the stats I'm looking at there, and it certainly feels that way from watching him play. So not having him is a big miss. And I think you're right to say that wickets are a problem. I mean, when you're trying to defend a score of 142, 143, you need to pretty much bowl the opposition out, don't you, or at least reduce them. So far, they're not going to be able to make it. And without the firepower to do that, it was always going to be a struggle. And I actually think they did quite most of the decisions they made tonight. They did pretty well. I mean, I was a little confused as to why they consistently decided to leave third man open for Wayne Madsen after he'd played his 5th reverse sweep off the spinner. That was a little perplexing, but the Sam Billings was quite brave with his decisions, to particularly bringing on Danny Briggs when he did to the short boundary and trying to burgle a wicket that way, which worked on a couple of occasions. And that was kind of, your options were either burgle a wicket like that or try and exert some pressure, which they started to do towards the end. I mean, that set of Tom Curran's, the penultimate set, was phenomenal, and his 5 before that was pretty good as well. He had an excellent night and has had a pretty good tournament as well with the bat. So I think a lot of their shortcomings, they did their best to get around tonight, but again, not quite enough. And I think that is probably where they've fallen down overall, just not quite consistent enough, I think.
As I mentioned earlier in the show, it was quite an intense race for qualifications. Another team that missed out, Ross's favourite team maybe in world cricket actually, Birmingham Phoenix. They needed a tie to make it through, and actually with sort of 4 balls to go,
It was
they
on.
probably had a 20% chance of getting through. They bowed out despite Matt Wade's heroics yesterday. Ed, it was kind of a story. Well, the season was a story of woe on the injury front for Birmingham Phoenix, wasn't it? I think it's reasonably impressive given the injuries that they did have, that they managed to win 5 of their 8 matches at all.
I think it's quite impressive, especially considering that after all of these injuries, the one guy that you'd think, well, we've got a banker here, Imran Tahir, was not himself. And I think it's a similar kind of story to the Oval Invincibles in a sense, that they lost all their wicket takers. Oval obviously lost Topley, lost Sakin Mahmood before the tournament, then you lost Gus Atkinson. Then for these guys, they've lost Adam Milne, then they've lost Ollie Stone, they lost Matt Fisher as well. All of these seamers, Chris Wokes as well, all of these seamers that were supposed to be the core of this side dropped. You're left with Kane Richardson, who's really, really good, but not necessarily a pure wicket taker, though he's been very good this tournament. Then you've got Tom Helm. Henry Brooks has been good in patches, but you're basically sticking a bowling attack together. And when your batting doesn't work, it's really difficult. I think Moeen's captained really well this tournament, besides the loss to the Manchester Originals. I think also, if you look at it, they lost Livingston for 2 games. Miles Hammond's not had a good tournament. Chris Benjamin's not had a good tournament. Will Smead has had that fantastic innings, but maybe hasn't had the consistent contributions he'd want. I think in general, I'm not sure how they've got to 5 wins, but they're an impressive cricket team, but everything kind of went against them this season. And I think all in all, with the players they have on their team now, probably don't quite deserve to get to that final 3, as great as they are to watch.
Yeah, I think I'd probably agree with that. Their batting had to carry them, and it probably, I mean, looking at the net run rate differential, it shows that on a couple of occasions it didn't quite fire. I think they'll remain a fan favourite because of the style of cricket they play, and because they've got Mo, and because they've got Livy, and I'd expect them. I'm sort of all the teams that didn't make the playoffs, them to be the ones that are most likely to challenge again next year, because I don't see that kind of core being dismantled in any way. I imagine it'll be back in some iteration next year, probably with a fast bowler or 2 actually on the field too.
It's interesting you say that, actually, because I think with the Oval Invincibles were kind of like the last ones out last year as well. And the Phoenix Invincibles are a really interesting position this year with retentions, because both the Phoenix and the Invincibles have a lot of players that are going to want pay rises. And as we saw in the draft last year, we saw Liam Dawson get 125k in the open draft. We saw Tom Kohler-Cadwell get 125k in the open draft. Players might look at that and think, I can get 50 more grand by entering the draft. And there are a lot of players on the Oval Invincibles team that probably deserve a pay rise, really. I mean,
they're probably all looking at Welsh Fire and thinking, well, I'll just have some free money over there, please.
That's the thing. I mean, Will Jacks is on 75k. Will Jacks might be a 125k player in an open draft, which is absolutely possible. Reece Topley at 60k, he isn't staying there. Riley Rousseau at 60k might not be staying there either. But then who do you move? Because you've got Narayan, Roy, Billings and Tom Curran in that top kind of set. So some of those players are going to have to leave, and it's a decision whether do you get rid of Jay Roy, do you move on from Tom Curran and boost Will Jacks and Reece Topley up? Probably 2 of those players will have to leave. So they're in a really interesting position where 2 of their core players could go, and that's where the draft will probably get interesting next year. And then with the Phoenix, also an issue. I don't know. Will Smead, by the way, is one of the most lovely guys out there, fantastic cricketer. The fact he signed on for 50k this year was remarkable. Apparently, that deal, I think, was probably signed before his PSL 90s. But Will Smead is more than a 50k player. So I think he'll probably look for a pay rise. Benny Howell at 75k after this season, he could very easily get 100k in the draft as well. So they're in an interesting position, these 2 sides, where 1 or 2 of their stars are going to have to go. So we might be seeing a very, very different way of doing things. And if, say, a team made an offer and told one of these stars, we'll pay you 125k in the open draft, we might see them in different colours. So things can rapidly change. And that's an exciting part of this offseason where the Invincibles and the Phoenix, who arguably have two of the best cores in the tournament, could see it ripped up. So I think we'll see them do really well again next year because they're really well run. I think they're really well coached in general. And specifically, I think the Phoenix are really well captained. But things are going to change and they're going to have to overcome them.
I think that that scotches they'll keep their core together and come back next year.
They can keep their core together. They can keep most of it. Like they can keep most of it, but it is going to be a couple of like your key guys are going to go. Where are you going to get that value from? So they can keep the core, but some of their good players are going.
They might just have to ask them nicely to turn down 25 grand.
And I personally think if you went up to Will Jacks and just said, "Hi, Will, look, you could have £50,000 more, but you can have maybe a nicer seat in the dressing room. We'll let you sit at the back of the coach. You can have all the KP nuts you want, anything. but
only if they're dry roasted.
Only if they're dry roasted. But I think that's the issue you come on to. You probably could convince players to take a pay cut, but 50k is a lot of money.
Yeah, it might depend on IPL gigs. Someone like Sunil Narayan, for example, probably isn't going to be bothered about an extra 25k in the 100 draft if he's going to have another year in the IPL on a bit more than that. So I suppose those are the guys you target, aren't they? If you want to make a deal and say, go on, just hang around here, it's nicer.
It's difficult though, because I think it's a prestige thing as well.
Yeah.
It's a prestige thing. You want that money, but Solomon Ryan's career doesn't go on forever, so he'll want that money. But it's a prestige thing. There's a reason these guys go in at 125k. There's a reason Chris Gale sets his 125k base price in the 100. He's not going to get picked up. He's just, they do it.
Chris Gale.
Tamim Iqbal has 125k base price. They do it because there's a level of prestige there as well. I don't think you're going to get Narayan to go down. What you probably could do, as they did last year, is release him and then retain and do the right to match retain in the kind of first round. Not to get too nerdy on draft stuff, but it does get a little bit complicated when you're building these sides. And I think it's those strong relationships you've hopefully built with these players might save you some money, but someone's going to have to go.
Yeah. The team that make it through at Birmingham's, well, not at Birmingham's expense, but the team who lost to Birmingham but will make it through, the London Spirit. They're another team that are slightly shorn of some of the star power that maybe propelled them through the earlier stages of the group stage. And this has been a mild criticism of the 100 in general, is there's been a fair turnover in foreign players. So they've lost Maxwell and Pollard. They brought Inglis in for one game, and then he got called up by Australia and so went away. I think last night, it was last night, I think, wasn't it, the game?
Yep.
They only played 2 overseas players, which is not perfect, and it isn't ideally what you want as a spectator. But they're through into the playoffs. They will play Manchester Originals on Friday night. Max, do they have much of a chance, or are they going to struggle?
I see the Spirit and the Originals sort of on opposing trajectories for me, where the Originals have weirdly started to put everything together in a way that I still can't quite comprehend, but it is happening. Spirit, like you say, are going sort of the other way. They started like a train. We didn't rate them that highly at the start anyway, but they had a really good start, and to have lost the guys like you say, Maxwell and Pollard, I think they could struggle a bit, but it's a one-off game, so it's very, very difficult to write anyone off. But I just feel like not that you are a believer in momentum so much, but I feel sort of the way the teams are going, I would lean Originals over Spirit.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. So if we assume, therefore, you've made that prediction, that it will be an Originals v Trent Rockets final. Ed, where do you put your money, your metaphorical money? Unless you think that London Spirit will knock out Originals, of course, in which case the whole thought exercise is ruined.
I don't think it's ruined. I think I'd make Originals favourites Slightly. I think if you look at the Aegeus Bowl, you've got a pitch that can occasionally be slow with those massive boundaries. And I think that probably plays into the Manchester Originals' favour in general. And the London Spirit, interesting. They have Owen Morgan, who's a great player of spin, left-handed, but he's the real only gun left-hander there. Jordan Thompson's not batted well this season, bar that amazing innings in the T20 finals there, which obviously everyone remembers. But bar that, he's barely made a run. And so they have a lot of right-handers. Tom Hartley's delighted, and none of them can play leg spin. So Matt Parkinson's delighted. So I think you also include the fact that Gleeson and Little and Walter can all take pace off, and they've got those options there. I think I would make them slight favourites. Then again, though, it is basically a London Spirit home game because all of their bowlers play there. Dawson, Crane, Chris Wood, Brad Wheel, Nathan Ellis. It is literally a London Spirit home game. So I'd probably make the original slight favourites, but I wouldn't be too confident. If it was a final, I think the Trent Rockets are the strongest team. I think they've really got everything you want at the moment, especially now Darren Milan's in great form. I still think their bowling is dodgy, but then again, they're going to have Samad Patel there. I don't know who they're going to replace Tabraiz Shamsi with, which is going to be a big concern for them. Because when you lose a gun leg spinner, who do you bring in? I mean, how many leg spinners are there left? I mean, was Tanvir Sangha the last one around? I mean, if Peter Hatsoglu's being picked up, where are you going for your leg spin?
Leg spin.
Well, I mean, you're very welcome. I used to before my shoulder injury. I was really ripping it up. But that's ultimately the issue, though, isn't it? Like, if you lose your players, like the Spirit have, who are you going to replace Tabraiz Shamsi with? So I think that is an issue. But I think with Milan and Hales and the way they're playing in general, if Luke Wood can go on a heater and rip through the top order, I make them favourites. But I also don't think the Trent Rockets are a perfect side. I think there's lots of issues with that bowling lineup specifically, and the middle order batting still hasn't really been properly tested, and a lot of those guys are out of form. So yeah, I'd make the Trent Rockets favourites, but I think it's interesting that I think the side that was probably the strongest on paper coming to this tournament, and the one that you'd think as kind of a fan favourite in the Birmingham Phoenix, who could still have all that batting to make up the bowling. Neither of them are there, and you have two quite flawed sides in the playoff, and the Rockets are a flawed side who no one thinks is flawed, but they perform well. So I think it'd be an interesting one, but I still think Trent Rockets have that one. And I've done that journey many times. Southampton to London is not a nice train journey or a bus journey, so that's not going to be a nice travel up on the Saturday morning either. So they probably have that on their side.
Yeah, for sure. The only other team I wanted to talk about one last time this season on the men's side before we do the women quickly is Welsh Fire, and I had a good story about them this week that multiple players on their side just aren't bothering to turn up for training anymore. They're quite literally turning up for the games and they disappear. So they're not at team meetings the next day. They're not at nets. That's it. And I asked a bit around about this because I thought it sounded so ridiculous. I said it occurred to me that maybe some players on the circuit have got their own personal coach that they would rather work with. I asked about that with people who would know, and then the answer I got is that it would be unheard of for a player to be using a personal coach in the middle of a tournament. So it'd be pretty miserable for them. 8 defeats, but you'd think there'd be quite a lot of change there going into next year.
There has to be, and I think it kind of starts at the top. Like, I hate to say this, because I really like him, but if Gary Kirsten's not fired this offseason or let go, then really this tournament has no integrity. Like, he's a really good coach, and there's a lot to like about Gary Kirsten, but he's only really won one game in 2 years. Johnny Bairstow won them 2 games last year, and then they won 1 game after that. They've gone 8 losses this year. I mean, they have been really unlucky. We talk about like the Phoenix being unlucky. They're so much worse. They don't get Naseem Shah in, which is a real shame. And then all of their gun batters completely lose form. Like, David Miller was in the IPL team of the tournament, like a couple of months ago, and now he can't get the ball off the square. Like, he can't seem to pick Tom Helm's slow balls. I mean, it's gone completely. Tom Banton's not having a great time of it, but obviously he's not been great. Joe Clark has just been picked up as a gold level pick in the Big Bash League.
I know, yeah.
He's just been picked up, and that's because he's
£1,200 a run.
But he just can't seem to get the ball off the square. Sam Hain as well, by the way, was in fantastic form for the Bears this year. Just haven't turned up. And I think this is what's interesting about the Fire is that actually, if you look at the way they recruited in the off season, it was perfectly fine. I mean, they probably could have got another bowler in, frankly, but like what they did was really sound. They got a lot of good cricketers in there. It's just none of them are in form. In fact, they're all like they've all got the yips, basically. It's all looked like they've gone away from cricket for 2 years, come back and haven't worked it out yet. Like the way Clark's been so conservative in the power play as well is weird. That's what Clark does. He goes at it. For some reason, he's just kind of serenely driving into the covers and knocking it around for 3 or 4 sets, and that gets pinned LBW by full toss. It's everything has gone wrong. I think that's ultimately what comes is you need to change the coach for a start, but you just need to change that. You need to create a winning culture somehow. And frankly, you just need to overhaul the players completely. Because I think you've heard stories. I think we've probably all heard stories about things within the Welsh Fire. They bounce around. I don't know how much truth there is. There might not be truth. There's a lot of good cricketers in there who I'm sure work very hard. But if you lose that many games, you just have to rip it up. And if I was them, I'd retain a handful of players, but I'd be letting a lot of big money guys go. I mean, I'm probably letting Tom Banton go for sure. I'd even consider getting rid of some of the bigger names that you might not consider doing. I'd really rip it up and bring in a completely new stack of players because they're going to have the first overall pick. So they have that up their sleeve. There's going to be a lot of teams who want to pay their good players. So lots of teams are going to elevate players up to the big price brackets. There might be a lot of open slots early on where they can get some big names. And then the names who enter those draft, as I said, there's lots of good players who are going to enter that draft looking for money. The Welsh Fire can pay them. So I think it's kind of a twofold thing. We need to completely shut it down, release loads of players, change coach, and then they need to find an identity is what they really need to find. And I don't necessarily think that's going the Glamorgan route. What it probably is working out exactly what kind of cricket team you want to be. I don't think they know what kind of cricket team they want to be. They just need to work out exactly who they are. Are they going to be like an insane pace bowling unit? Are they going to be the Guyana Amazon Warriors, provide an absolute dust bowl and play 5 spinners? Are they going to just be really batting heavy? What are they going to be? And they have to work out their identity. They have to bring in the right players and they have to build a different culture. And I think a lot of that will be done with the draft, but obviously it's working out which coach you can bring in. Obviously, if you were going to, Ricky Ponting would be the guy. If you could convince him to come over and do the 100, Ricky Ponting would be the guy. But then there's also some interesting domestic coaches. If you want a culture setter, I mean, Paul Nixon for a start would be an absolutely fantastic choice. I mean, I think if you look at what he's done with Leicestershire, sometimes they push the boundaries a little bit too much. We're very aware of that. But God, the Welsh Fire need something like that, don't they? So there are options out there, but it's got to be a full-scale rebuild. I personally think it's possible. Maybe I'm being optimistic. I think it's possible, but the worst thing they could do would be, you know what? All of these players lost form. It could be better last year. Let's just make a couple of tweaks here. I think you just have to pull the plug and get rid of some players who are really good and just accept it's a rebuild. So, yeah, it's not the nicest situation for them to be in, but this tournament moves fast and the crowds aren't there.
I mean, it's definitely possible for them to recover because that's the point of a franchise tournament with a draft system, isn't it? Everyone has the same opportunity and the same resources to make a team that should compete. So I'm sure they can do it, but I also think we should just relegate them to the Lanka Premier League.
Now, this isn't a terrible idea, but what I will say though is like there are some good domestic players coming through Glamorgan. There's some good players. Prem Sisadia, I think, with another season or two could be a nice performer for you. There's a lad called Tom Bevan who hasn't played for them much but is really ripping up the second 11 cricket. So there's some nice cricketers around. Dan Douthwaite, you bring in a couple of them. You bring in some real proper stars. Like I'm talking a Shaheen Sharafridi, a Shadab Khan, whoever you want at the top of the draft. You can turn it around. But yeah, it's really disappointing because you never want to see a cricket team like that. And I can't really think of a worse team. Maybe that Sydney Thunder side, early Big Bash. They were pretty bad. Antigua Hawksbills and St. Lucia Stars in the CPL were bad for a while. The great Pune Warriors India, like a winning percentage of 25% over 3 years in the IPL. But they're in that league.
They might be the worst.
They might be, genuinely.
On the women's side of things then, and we'll run through this quickly, looking mainly at the top 3, maybe rather than sort of doing all the various permutations running into the final round of games. Although, if you do want to go back in time and look at it, there were some interesting situations that developed. Teams having to win in 60 balls. There was at least one shootout match as well, whether the winner went through. But the end result of everything is that Trent Rockets will play Southern Brave on Friday night, and then the winner will play last year's champions Oval Invincibles on Saturday at Lords. So it's Trent Rockets women v Southern Brave women on Friday. Max, is there going to be a home advantage, do you think, for the Southern Brave?
I'm not sure if there'll be necessarily a home advantage so much as I just think they're the better side for me. I mean, I think we pinned Oval and Southern Brave as the sort of the two most likely to win, and when we sort of previewed everything, they just sort of look a cut above in terms of the personnel that they've got. I mean, that's obviously it's only 6 games, so you don't get a full opportunity to test that out, but that's what's been the case so far. And Southern Brave, had they not lost today unexpectedly against the Superchargers, what a season, or what 100 Laura Wolfart's had. But by the way, that's been she's been stunning. But had they not lost that game, they'd be looking at a 6-0 record and topping the table. So I think they're the better side, and I expect them to do winning, and we'll be seeing a repeat of last year's final, I believe.
Yeah, okay, I think that's fair enough. I mean, I don't think it's inconceivable that Trent Rockets pull off a little bit of a surprise here. I think actually they may not have done justice going into the playoffs with the 3-3 record that they have. Ed, have you got? Do you agree with Max? Let's put it simply.
I do. I just think the Southern Brave are by far the best team in this tournament. I mean, I think the job that Charlotte Edwards has done there is phenomenal in terms of the players they've brought in. They're just far superior to literally every other team in a roster situation. We kind of threw this idea around, and we were talking about who is actually the most valuable person in the 100. And I say person because I think the most valuable person in the 100, especially in the women's tournament, Charlotte Edwards. She created a juggernaut of a side. They don't have a draft. So she basically called up every player and said, "Do you want to play for me?" And they all said yes, because they want to play for Charlotte Edwards. And suddenly they have the best team in the tournament. And I think I really do think they've got everything. I mean, you go through the side and you have, I think Lauren Bell's exceptional. I think she's going to play for England a lot. And then you have the experience to go alongside that of Anya Strubsole. Amanda Jade Willington's a really good leggy. And Freya Kemp looks exciting as well. And then with the back, Dunkley, Mandela,
I mean, the top
Wyatt,
6
Adams,
is just
Kemp. It's ridiculous,
isn't it?
It's ridiculous. I mean, Maya Boucher hasn't even got going in this tournament, and I think she's really fun as a player. So they really have everything. And what I think is probably a good thing for them is that they got their collapse out of the way. Last year, they won every game until the final, and they collapsed because Marizan Kapp was steaming in. They collapsed today with the top order, so hopefully they've got that out of the way, and they can come home screaming. I think really they've got a free run at it, and I think they're the best side. What really matters is, can they overcome Alana King? I think will probably be my question, because I think she's a phenomenal bowler. Can they overcome Alana King? And then is Marizan Kapp fit to play in the final? Because in terms of all the game records in T20 cricket over the years, Marizan Kapp's right at the top. If she gets going in the power play, takes a couple of wickets, as we saw in the final last year, literally nothing can stop her. She completely changes games. So I think that's the Braves' issue here. They've got all the talent, but can they overcome 2 genuine stars with the ball in King and Kapp? If they can do that, then I think they'll win it. And I think they're the clear best tournament. But 2 very good sides to beat, and you have to beat them. And that's what's great. The Brave might be the best side on paper, but they didn't beat them in the final last year, and they've got to do it twice now.
Yeah. That's the case. I'm just looking at Oval Invincibles, and the team that await them in the final. I mean, the story of their season to some extent,
Dropping Danny Van Niekerk.
Even though they've won 5 matches, is the wife rotation that they've got going on. Max, who do you think they'll play in the final? And can they repeat?
I think if Kapp's fit, I think they'll pick Marizan Kapp and Susie Bates again. I think Van Niekerk will miss out, because I mean, the first time they did it didn't work very well, but since then it's been quite successful. I think sort of that extra power play bowler is what they need rather than the extra spinner, especially when you've got Alice Capsey around who can be very useful with the ball as well. So for me, I think that's probably the route they'll likely go down, and they absolutely can do it again. But it will depend on them outscoring. Basically, I think it'll end up being
that's
a
normally
bat
how
off
you win
between
cricket.
yeah. But it's a very good point. But you know what I mean. It's gonna be a pretty much a power hitting contest between the two top sixes. I mean, the Invincibles set the originals the highest chase, and they had to do it within 72 balls today. So that wasn't much fun for them if they wanted to qualify it. And I just think the firepower they've had so far this tournament, they absolutely can do it again, but it'll be a different matter doing it against Southern Brave.
I think there's a funny thing about this, though, isn't it? I think with the Susie Bates versus Danny Van Niekerk thing is ultimately like, what matters to you most? Is it about winning 3 p.m. tomorrow, or is it about next year? Because I can guarantee you one thing: neither Marizanne Kapp and Dame Van Niekerk are playing for the Oval Invincibles next year. They are not coming back to this franchise. You could give them whatever money they want, they aren't coming back. Like the amount of drama here, it's all over Instagram. I don't know if either of you guys, anyone follows Van Niekerk or Kapp or Instagram. All they do is snipe. Like Twitter, Instagram is just full of snipes at the coach, at Susie Bates. And in a cricketing sense, it makes sense because Danny Van Niekerk's been injured and so hasn't really bowled much up to this point. Missed out on the Commonwealth Games as well. So hasn't got much match fitness. So if you're thinking, well, how is this side going to work? Obviously, you pick Bates. But
she's
now
batted well.
Susie Bates has been really good. Susie Bates has been really good. I think striking at 150 this tournament. And I think what's been really nice as well is they haven't necessarily needed the extra bowling because Eva Gray's been really good with the ball.
Yep.
Smell's been really good with the ball, the left-arm spinner. Welsh, by the way. So if the Welsh Fire are looking for a big old rebuild, here we go. Claire Nicholas and Sophie Small are coming in. But they've been able to offer something with the ball. I thought it was interesting. We thought they'd go quite batting heavy with how they did it, and they play Van Niekerk and Kapp and have all those Maddie Villiers and also Alice Capsey offering something with the ball. We thought they'd really pack the batting. We thought we'd really see a lot more of Emily Windsor and Eilish Cranston, but they've only played 4 games between each other. So we've seen a lot of Kira Chatley as well, which we didn't necessarily know if we'd see. She's been batting 6 or 7 rather than 8 or 9 where we projected. So they've really gone in on these domestic bowlers rather than domestic batters, which is interesting because Cranston and Windsor in sparkling form would be great stars for, say, the Welsh Fire. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I think they're a good side. I think if Marizanne Kapp's not fit, I'm not sure they have it to beat the Brave. But then it becomes the interesting thing next year, isn't it? How do you replace your captain and the best T20 player potentially of all time? And also Susie Bates getting on a bit, so you're probably not sure how much you have left there. Bit of a weird situation for them.
Although arguably, if you stick with Susie Bates and you stick with Ishmael as well, realistically, you only need to find one world-class overseas slot because they've kind of they made a bit of an error in the fact that they've left themselves in a situation where they do have to choose between one of the 3 rather than sort of having someone who you would have a defined backup.
I don't think they've made an error. I think ultimately, if Dame Van Niekerk's not fit to bowl and Susie Bates batting really well, if you want to win cricket games, you've got to make the decision. I think it's a really unfortunate situation, but it's not their fault. And if they win the final, it's worth it. Next year, they might come back with 3-4 different overseas because Ismail's had, the fitness issues there as well, though she's been bowling all tournament. What's really interesting about Ismail, by the way, not taking wickets, which is really weird because she bowls rapid and always seemed to pick up wickets. Now in this tournament, averaging 50, has been taking wickets for South Africa. There's so many questions here. It's a next year issue. I like to think of it that way. That is next year's Oval Invincibles problem. So you can worry about that in December when you've won 2 consecutive trophies.
Win 2 in a row and then don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. When you've got 2 trophies, you could really do anything. But it is interesting that they've had to 360 out of this so much, and they better win this year because next year they might be losing a lot of players. And,
the new Welsh Fire.
Marizanne Kapp and Dame Van Niekerk are going to go to Welsh Fire and really come back to cause problems.
We've got one question in, Ed, and then we're going to let you go. And it's from, we had the same question in on Discord, which you can sign up to if you're a patron, patreon.com/the cricket pod. But we were asked it on Twitter too, from osmith3042. How would you rate the standard of the 100 after these group stages compared to other franchise comps around the world? I don't know if anyone's got a strong, I've thought about this, but I've got a bit of an answer myself, but I don't know if anyone else would like to go first.
I think that the 100 is at a weird spot where it's the 100, if it was actually like working operationally fully, would be the second best franchise tournament in the world by a decent distance. Everybody this year is injured. I think everyone has to remember that. The Southern Brave literally do not have a single one of their frontline bowlers fit. Like in terms of seam bowlers, Tom Mills is injured, Chris Jordan's injured, Jofra Archer's injured, Craig Overton's injured, George Garton's been injured all tournament, is just playing for some reason. Literally everyone's injured. Saki Mahmood's injured, Reece Topley's injured, Mark Wood's injured, Chris Wilkes is injured, Ollie Stone is injured, Matt Fisher is injured. Literally everybody is injured. I've just listed, like, you could give every single side.
Josh Butler and Liam Livingston are injured.
Welsh Fire could have 3 really good seamers. You could give some seamers to Northern Superchargers. You could do Brian Cast is injured, I think.
Everyone could have a seamer.
Everyone could have a seamer. Literally every team is 2 seamers down. Like I think people they look at that and like, well, is this the same standard as the Blast? Well, in the Blast, for some reason, players were fit and ready at least. But in this one, everyone's been injured, and then the overseas players are going off to the CPL. That shouldn't be as big an issue next year, theoretically. You don't have the Asia Cup in the way. We should see better availability for Pakistani players, hopefully for some Sri Lankan players. If the Sri Lankan board don't just decide when Indu Hasaranga can't turn up 2 days before the tournament. I think it has the potential to be the second best tournament in the world. I think it's definitely better than the Big Bash. I think it's probably better than the PSL if players were fit. It doesn't come anywhere close to the IPL, I don't think. But genuinely, I think it's if players were fit and if overseas weren't heading off, it would be the second best. And given how strong England's domestic core is, if you've got some good overseas in, I don't see why it couldn't be the strongest franchise tournament in the world. Now the IPL has 10 teams and things are starting to maybe lessen in quality.
Yeah, I don't know if it will catch the IPL. I think the 4 overseas players helps there. And then, you speak about English domestic depth. It's definitely the same for India, right? I mean, there's about 60 players that have played for India. I mean, anyone who's tried to play the fantasy league looking for uncapped players, it's almost impossible because everybody in that team in that league has played for India. I'd say it's probably on track to be second best. I think there are a couple of barriers in the way around seamers, definitely, but a lot of that's probably injury related. And I think, while there are questions around seam bowler availability, it's hard to say it's better than the PSL on that front. I wonder as well next year, and I heard Steve Harmison talking about this today, and I did sort of agree with him, even though it was quite an incoherent run overall. But he made the point that because it is a different format, there are some teams that don't seem to have quite figured out exactly what the rhythm of the game is, and I think that should get better as well. So you factor that in. I mean, it sounds simple, doesn't it? You only lose 20 balls, so you're just a bit more aggressive. But there are some teams that are quite clearly getting that
not
wrong.
doing that.
Yeah, I would say that. But counterpoint, we've been playing T20 cricket for 19 years, and Middlesex still haven't worked it out.
For sure.
This is the thing, I think. But I agree. I think one more year, teams will start to work out. I think they've tactically been better this year, and hopefully next year you don't have a Welsh Fire either. So another year of sharpening. I completely agree.
Okay, well, there we go. There's our answer to that. We're going to wrap up part 1 now, and we'll be back to talk about the Asia Cup in 25 seconds.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.